My name is Isabella, and for most of my 30 years, I lived quietly in the shadow of other people's expectations. Not long ago, I was simply one of thousands of young professionals, hustling through Manhattan, holding tight to my job, keeping my dreams small and private. If you had passed me on the sidewalk, you would not have given me a second look. But just beneath the surface, I carried a strength that no one in my family ever seemed to notice, a resilience born of years quietly watching, waiting, and learning who I truly was. They never saw it coming. Not my parents, not my sister, not even the fiancé who once promised me forever, and then broke that vow with barely a backward glance. And as I sit here now looking back at how it all began, I want to ask you, have you ever found yourself cast as the invisible one in your own family's story? If so, you may find this tale strangely familiar. I grew up in a family that believed in appearances. My parents, second-generation immigrants from Italy, ran a respected real estate firm and held tightly to the old-world value that family loyalty meant everything unless, of course, you did not fit the picture they wanted to present. My younger sister, Madeline, 2 years my junior, was the golden child. She was bright and pretty, the type who won spelling bees and piano competitions before most children could write their names. Madeline's report cards were displayed on the fridge. Her dance trophies lined the living room shelf. When Madeline won her first statewide debate tournament, my parents threw her a dinner party inviting half the neighborhood. When I finished top of my class at public school, my mother simply said, "That's nice, Isabella. But you've always been our responsible one. That's what we expect." It is a strange feeling being the one who is never quite enough, not for lack of effort, but for lack of sparkle. Looking back, I can trace the distance between me and my family through small, sharp moments. My 10th birthday, for instance, was quietly erased when Madeline's ballet recital was scheduled for the same afternoon. There were no candles, no singing, just a gentle pat on the shoulder as my mother rushed out the door calling back, "We'll celebrate next week, darling. Your sister needs us at the theater." The party never came. At 15, I received my first real job offer, a summer internship at a law office. I was so proud, clutching the acceptance letter in my hands. But the only words my father offered were, "Make sure you help Madeline with her college prep. You know how stressed she gets." Even in adulthood, these patterns deepened. Madeline went to private university on a full scholarship with our parents covering every living expense. I attended a state school, scraping by on student loans, holding 3 part-time jobs. When Madeline's first apartment lease fell through, my parents wrote a check for $8,000 without a second thought. When my own rent was raised, my father's advice was simple: work harder. That's what we did. If you have ever been the steady one, the reliable one, the one nobody thinks you'll understand. I learned to stop asking, stop expecting, and quietly built a life on the edge of their orbit, always hoping, never quite belonging. Despite the ways I was overlooked, I never managed to turn my back completely. That is the thing about loyalty, it becomes a habit even when it is unreturned. Last year, when my father's business faced a sudden audit, I spent weeks after work reviewing files, helping him sort through paperwork late into the night. He never mentioned it again. When Madeline faced a tuition shortfall at graduate school, $12,000 that appeared out of nowhere, I sent a wire transfer through an old college friend, making it look like a grant. I watched from a distance as my sister celebrated, never knowing where the money came from. Even my mother, who once confided in me about her medical debt, found her hospital bills quietly settled. I never expected thanks. The truth is, giving was my way of hoping for a place at the table, a place that never seemed reserved for me. Looking back now, I see all the signs. I should have known that a storm was gathering. As Madeline's law school graduation approached, the invitations went out, heavy white envelopes with gold lettering, the sort of flourish that announced to the world, "Our daughter has made it." But inside my envelope, there was something extra. A handwritten note in my sister's perfect script: "Come see what a real accomplishment looks like." At first, I almost laughed. Then I realized this was not an invitation. It was a challenge, a warning, a reminder of where I stood. Little did I know that in accepting, I would not just attend a ceremony. I would walk straight into the heart of the storm and change our family's story forever. If you have ever wondered what would happen if the one they forgot finally stood up, you may want to keep listening. Graduation day in Manhattan carries a kind of electricity, 1,000 families swelling the marble halls, bouquets, and camera flashes, the faint smell of expensive perfume and anticipation. For most people, it is a moment to be celebrated, to gather and cheer for hard-earned triumphs. For me, that day felt more like an ambush. I arrived early dressed simply but with intention, a navy dress I had bought on clearance, my mother's old pearl earrings, and a silk scarf knotted at the neck. I remember pausing on the steps of the university hall, heart racing. Did I belong here? Every instinct urged me to turn back to spare myself the humiliation that surely waited inside. But I took a breath and entered anyway. After all, there comes a point when you stop running and face what must be faced. The hall itself was breathtaking, vaulted ceilings, banners for every department, and rows of seats reserved for the city's old money and new success stories. I spotted my family easily. They were all there, a cluster of prideful faces near the front. My father's shoulders straight, wearing a new suit. My mother dabbing her eyes dramatically. Madeline radiant in her academic regalia, already surrounded by well-wishers and photographers. I felt invisible yet somehow on display, like everyone was waiting to see if I would crumble or walk away. If you have ever entered a room knowing you are the outsider in your own family, you know the strange mixture of dread and stubbornness that carries you forward. The ceremony itself was grand, but my family made it theatrical. Every time Madeline's name was mentioned, my parents clapped a little louder than anyone else. My mother nudged the dean, whispering that her daughter was a star. My father gave a short, boastful speech about hard work and legacy, pausing only to thank everyone who helped along the way. Everyone, of course, except me. Even distant cousins had flown in for the occasion. Old friends of the family posed for photos congratulating Madeline as if she had climbed Everest. Through it all, I sat quietly in my seat, hands folded, head high, refusing to flinch. You might think I felt small, but something else began to take root, an odd sense of clarity. It was as if I was finally seeing my family as they truly were, a machine built for applause, with no space for those who did not shine. A few seats away, I caught snippets of a conversation between my uncle and aunt. "It's wonderful, isn't it?" my uncle murmured. "Madeline always did outpace her sister." His wife replied, "Well, some people are born to support, not to lead." Their words slid over me like cold rain, but I let them pass. I had heard worse. Things came to a head during the post-ceremony reception. The crowd moved into the grand ballroom, laughter echoing beneath crystal chandeliers. Madeline stood near the podium, glass in hand, the center of every conversation. At one point, my mother called out just loud enough for the nearest group to hear, "Isabella, why don't you join us for a photo? Madeline says she wants a picture with her biggest supporter." A handful of heads turned. Someone snickered. I felt the sting of their words, as sharp and deliberate as a slap. But I walked over, composed, and stood beside my sister, who gave me a brilliant, empty smile. "You look tired," she whispered out of the corner of her mouth. "You should be grateful we let you in the family picture." Click. The moment was preserved, humiliation and all. Later, when the dean toasted Madeline for her scholarship and dedication, my father turned to the crowd and said, "This is what happens when a family pulls together. We never let anyone drag us down." I understood what he meant, and so did everyone else. If you have ever felt like the background in your own story, cheered when useful, dismissed when inconvenient, you know what it means to sit through such moments with your dignity intact. But I did not leave. I stood my ground, smiled when required, and listened to the endless praise heaped on Madeline. Through it all, I felt a slow, powerful resolve growing inside me. Sometimes all it takes is one more indignity to turn quiet patience into determination. As the reception wound down and the applause faded, Madeline pressed an envelope into my hand. Her eyes gleamed. "A little something to thank you for being here," she said. I opened it later, away from the noise. Inside was a card. "You'll always be my role model in how to endure disappointment." A sharp line meant to wound, but instead I felt strangely calm. For years I had tried to win their approval. Now I realized I did not need it. I had something far stronger: truth, evidence, and a plan that no one in that gilded room suspected. Have you ever been underestimated by everyone who claims to know you best? If so, you will understand what comes next. Because sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is let them think you are beaten. Little did my family know their triumph that day was nothing but the opening act. As I left the hall, the city lights sparkling outside, I whispered to myself, "They have no idea what is coming." And neither did I, at least not fully. But I was ready to find out. It is funny, the small things you remember when the foundation of your life begins to shift. For me, it started on a chilly evening in late autumn, nearly a year before that fateful graduation. I was coming home from work, the city already dark, my inbox brimming with deadlines and demands. I remember passing a bakery window and catching a glimpse of my own reflection, tired, distracted, but content in a quiet sort of way. Back then, I believed in the basic decency of people, especially those closest to me. Madeline and I had once been close. In childhood, we were co-conspirators, partners in mischief sharing, whispered secrets beneath blankets when our parents' voices drifted down the hall. Even as we grew apart, I held tight to the hope that someday we would find our way back. She was, after all, my sister. So, when I first met Andrew, I trusted Madeline's judgment. He was a rising young attorney, charming in a polished way, always quick with a compliment, and eager to fit in with my family. My parents adored him instantly. "He's the perfect match for you, Isabella," my mother had said. "Just think of the grandchildren," I laughed, then letting myself hope for a future that felt for once within reach. It was 3 months before our engagement party that the cracks began to show. Andrew became distant, distracted during dinner, his phone forever buzzing with work emergencies. He and Madeline spent more time together planning a charity event for the family's business. I tried not to read too much into it. I trusted them both. But trust, as I learned, is not an insurance policy against betrayal. One Sunday afternoon, I returned home unexpectedly early. I found the apartment quiet save for muffled laughter coming from the guest room. At first, I assumed Madeline was on the phone. But then I heard Andrew's voice, low and familiar, followed by a sharp, silenced giggle. My stomach dropped. What I saw when I opened the door is something I will never forget. My fiancé, my sister, entwined in a moment that left no room for doubt. The look on their faces, first shock, then panic, then something cold and defiant. "It is not what it looks like," Andrew stammered, but the words were empty, useless. Madeline did not bother to explain. She simply straightened her blouse, smirked, and said, "You should have knocked. If you have ever discovered a betrayal so deep it left you hollow, you know how the world narrows to a single point: pain, disbelief, the sound of your own heartbeat roaring in your ears." I left that night with nothing but my purse, wandering the city for hours, replaying every conversation, every shared meal. The next day, I told my parents what had happened. I expected outrage, loyalty, maybe even comfort. What I got was silence. My mother's lips pressed thin, my father looking anywhere but at me. "There, young Isabella," my mother finally said. "Mistakes happen. Do not overreact." My father added, "You know how sensitive Madeline Island, she always felt second best to you." Maybe this was her way of acting out. I tried to protest, to explain that this was not a childhood spat, but a wound that would not heal. My parents refused to take sides. In the end, the side they chose was not neutrality, it was convenience. They wanted peace appearances and Madeline's bright future untouched by scandal. If you have ever pleaded for justice from those who only want comfort, you know how quickly love turns conditional. Within a month, Madeline and Andrew were officially a couple. My parents embraced them, both eager to restore the family's image. Invitations to family dinners arrived with my name conspicuously missing. Group texts became one-on-one conversations. My mother's calls dwindled to brief, perfunctory check-ins if they came at all. The worst of it was the public narrative that emerged that I had always been difficult, too serious, never able to keep up with Madeline's charm or Andrew's ambition. I watched as old friends drifted away, unsure what to believe, unwilling to take sides. It was during this time that I discovered a string of emails between Madeline and my parents, messages never meant for my eyes. In them, they strategized about how to support Madeline through this transition, to help Andrew feel welcome in the family, to avoid upsetting Isabella further. There was not a word about my pain, my loss, or my future. I realized then that I had become an afterthought in my own life. The only thing left was my resolve. If no one would defend my place in the family, I would claim it myself. Outwardly, I accepted my new role, the absent sister, the black sheep. But inwardly, I began to gather what little strength remained. I poured myself into my work, saved every penny, and built alliances where I could. I started documenting every slight, every insult, every time I was erased from the family story. It was during one late night at the office, as I sorted through paperwork for a case I was assisting, that I stumbled upon something unexpected: a trail of financial documents, trusts, and deeds, legal memos in my grandmother's name. Buried among them was a draft of a new will, unsigned but clear in its intent. It left the majority of my grandmother's estate not to Madeline, not to my parents, but to me. I did not know what to make of it then, but a new thought began to take shape. Sometimes justice comes not through confrontation, but through patience. Sometimes the best revenge is simply refusing to disappear. If you have ever wondered what would happen if you quietly built your own defense while everyone else celebrated your defeat, you may see yourself in what I did next. Because the day would come when all the family secrets, the betrayals, the money, the truth would be forced into the light. And when that happened, not even Madeline's charm could protect her. The week after Madeline's graduation was a whirlwind of headlines and hashtags. Alumni group chats buzzed with photos and praise. Old neighbors posted snapshots from the ceremony, all tagged with Madeline's name. If you believed social media, you'd think the entire city had turned out just to celebrate her success. I faded into the background, a silent observer, until the moment came to step forward. On the final day of graduation festivities, the university hosted a private reception for donors, faculty, and select families. My mother called it a gathering for real legacy and made a point of mentioning that the invitation was extended only to those who truly mattered. Yet a last-minute call from the university's development office meant for Madeline landed in my inbox by mistake. We look forward to seeing both Anderson sisters this afternoon. Please confirm attendance. Sometimes fate hands you an open door. I arrived not in navy but in white, my only act of quiet rebellion. Heads turned as I entered the grand hall, conversations halting mid-sentence. There is a peculiar silence that falls when someone unexpected walks into a room reserved for the chosen. I smiled politely and found a seat at the edge of the crowd. The program unfolded as planned: speeches, toasts, a video montage of Madeline's accomplishments. My parents glowed with pride, my mother whispering pointedly, "We always knew she'd be the one to make us proud." Then the university president took the podium to announce a surprise, a major donation in Madeline's name, funds allegedly provided by an anonymous family supporter. Madeline's eyes sparkled as she accepted the applause, never suspecting the donor sat quietly just feet away. At the height of celebration, the family attorney, Mr. Callahan, a man with impeccable timing, approached the stage with a briefcase. He cleared his throat and asked for a moment, a rare occurrence in such carefully orchestrated events. "If I may," he began, "there is one final piece of family business." He nodded to me and the crowd's attention shifted. My heart pounded, but my voice was steady. "I believe this concerns my grandmother's legacy," I said, meeting Madeline's eyes. For the first time, I saw a flicker of uncertainty on her face. Mr. Callahan produced a thick envelope, sealed and notarized. "It is my duty to share the revised estate documents executed shortly before Mrs. Conti's passing. In accordance with her wishes, the bulk of her holdings, including the family property on 72nd Street, the trust account totaling $11.8 million, and all associated business shares have been transferred to Isabella." Gasps filled the room. Madeline's hands tightened on her wineglass. My mother's jaw dropped, her face blanching. My father's bravado melted away, replaced by silent shock. Some in the crowd began to murmur, first curiosity, then disbelief, and finally a ripple of sympathy that did not flow in Madeline's direction. Mr. Callahan continued. "All decisions were made independently, witnessed and notarized. A video statement from Mrs. Conti confirms her intentions." On the large screen behind the podium, a pre-recorded message from my grandmother played, her voice clear, her words resolute. She spoke of fairness, of lessons learned, of the importance of rewarding quiet strength over performance. Madeline, in a rare moment of panic, protested. "This isn't possible. You must have manipulated her. Everyone knows you were never close to Nana. She adored me." The crowd stiffened at her outburst, and more than one phone discreetly recorded the moment. My mother hissed, "You can't do this. This is our family's legacy. You should be grateful we even let you in the family photo." Her words, echoing across the hushed room, landed with a weight that could not be ignored. I stood quietly, letting the silence do what years of pleading never could. There is a unique kind of revenge in allowing people to show themselves as they truly are, especially in public. A professor near the front cleared his throat. "Congratulations, Isabella. I hope you'll consider joining our alumni advisory board. It's time for a new legacy, wouldn't you say?" What none of us anticipated was the effect of technology. Within an hour, clips from the event began circulating online: Madeline's meltdown, my mother's pointed barbs, and my grandmother's dignified message. Group chats filled with memes and commentary, some supportive, some cruel. "Family drama, Manhattan style," someone wrote. Another post read, "When the background sister owns the story." The university itself issued a statement commending Mrs. Conti's values of equity and resilience. My inbox filled with messages from old classmates and distant relatives. Some offered apologies, others opportunities. If you have ever waited for the world to see the truth you carried all along, you know the peculiar mix of relief, vindication, and sadness that follows. It is a bittersweet thing to win by exposing what should have remained private, but sometimes justice is only possible in the light. Would you have fought back if your own family tried to erase your future? I wonder that myself. For years, I longed for acceptance. Now I had something better: respect, agency, and the quiet knowledge that the story would never be written without me again. Little did I know the aftermath would bring new challenges and a freedom I had never dared imagine. After the ceremony, the world felt impossibly loud and strangely silent all at once. My phone vibrated ceaselessly. Old college friends, curious acquaintances, distant relatives, and journalists I had never met all seemed to have something to say. Even as I left the university hall, the city felt different. For years, I had passed through crowds as a shadow, a name only whispered as a footnote to Madeline's triumphs. Now I felt the eyes of the world searching for my story. My family, meanwhile, was unraveling in real time. Madeline stormed from the reception red-eyed and shaking, surrounded by a trio of old friends who suddenly seemed more interested in their phones than her tears. My mother tried to intercept me at the elevator, her voice sharp and brittle. "This is a mistake, Isabella. You can't possibly believe you deserve all this. That money, that house, they were meant for us." I met her gaze with a steadiness I did not know I possessed. Sometimes life gives you exactly what you earned, even if it does not look the way you imagined. She looked away first. In the weeks that followed, my family's desperation became public. My parents issued statements through their business contacts hinting at legal action and irregularities in my grandmother's estate. But my grandmother's video, the notarized will, and the firm legal documentation silenced most of those efforts. The real estate community, always hungry for gossip, turned cold toward my parents' firm. Madeline, in a last attempt to rally sympathy, posted a long message on social media. She wrote of injustice and manipulation, careful never to name me directly, but everyone knew. She received hundreds of comments, half supportive, half biting. More than one classmate posted, "Maybe if you'd ever thought about someone else's feelings, you'd still have a sister." The humiliation was total and impossible to contain. Some of Madeline's oldest friends faded away, embarrassed to be associated with a viral meltdown. Others, true to the season, shifted their loyalty overnight. In private, I received a stream of awkward apologies, people explaining that they never really believed the stories about you, Isabella, and hoping I would give them another chance. What surprised me most was the reaction of the broader community. Alumni who had never spoken to me reached out with stories of feeling invisible in their own families, of being overlooked and underestimated. Strangers in my building, people I had only ever nodded to in the elevator, began to greet me warmly, even offering help or congratulations. I attended my first alumni board meeting, sitting at the same table that had always seemed reserved for people like Madeline. The dean shook my hand and thanked me for bringing new perspective and humility to our legacy. It was strange feeling respected and welcome for the first time, not because of my relation to someone else, but because I had endured and prevailed. Of course, my family did not let go easily. My father sent a carefully worded letter, equal parts regret and subtle threat, reminding me that family is forever and warning that money has a way of isolating people. My mother called on holidays, her voice sugar sweet, inquiring after my health and suggesting we put all this ugliness behind us. Madeline's attempts were more dramatic. She showed up unannounced at my apartment one Saturday morning, her eyes rimmed with sleeplessness. "You've made your point," she said, voice shaking. "But this was never supposed to be your life. Nana just felt sorry for you. Give me back what's mine. You don't belong in that house." I listened calmly, for the first time in my life, unmoved by her tears or tantrums. "This house was never yours," I said. "It was given to the person who saw it as home, not as a trophy." She stared at me, and for a moment I saw not the golden child, but a young woman who had never learned how to stand alone. The story continued to ripple outward. Clips of the graduation reveal and my family's reactions went viral, not just among the alumni, but across the city. There were podcasts dissecting the Manhattan family meltdown, and more than one tabloid article ran headlines like "Quiet Sister Inherits $11.8 million, Golden Child Melts Down." I received requests for interviews, book deals, reality TV appearances, most of which I declined. I did agree to speak at a women's networking event. As I told my story, I looked out at a sea of faces, young, old, hopeful, and battle-scarred. Sometimes surviving is the loudest revenge of all, I told them. The applause was thunderous and real. Alone in my new home, I sometimes felt the ache of what was lost. Family dinners, birthdays, the illusion that we were ever truly close. There is a particular grief in realizing that some bridges once burned are not meant to be rebuilt. But there was also relief and even joy. I learned to fill the rooms of my grandmother's house with new friends, neighbors, and colleagues who respected me for myself. I picked up old hobbies, invited people over for long, unhurried dinners, and built new traditions that did not depend on anyone's approval but my own. One evening, as I unpacked a box of my grandmother's things, I found a note she had written tucked between recipe cards: "Family is made, not born. Choose wisely and love fiercely." Her handwriting trembled with age, but the meaning was clear. If you have ever waited for someone else to acknowledge your pain, to apologize for years of neglect, you may wait forever. True justice is rarely the thunderclap we expect. More often, it is the quiet space we finally claim for ourselves the right to exist without apology. My family became a cautionary tale in certain circles, and sometimes even now I hear that Madeline has reinvented herself in some new city, that my parents still whisper about what might have been. But I am at peace with the past. There are things I wish had gone differently. There are things I wish I had never had to endure. But given the chance to go back, I would still choose to stand my ground, because dignity once claimed is rarely lost again. If you have ever been forced to start over, not by choice but by necessity, know this: the story is never truly finished. The world is always ready to tell you who you are, but you can always tell it no, not this time. Would you forgive those who hurt you if they asked? Or would you close the door and begin again? I am still answering that question for myself every day. Because sometimes the only way to move forward is to stop waiting for someone to save you and choose your own ending. It has been just over 18 months since that final day at the university, the day when truth eclipsed every story that had been spun about me for a lifetime. Sometimes I wake in my own bed sunlight, warming the floorboards of a home that truly belongs to me, and for a moment I marvel at how quiet the world feels. Not the kind of silence that comes from loneliness, but the peaceful hush of a storm finally past. There is no more frantic checking of my phone for messages from family that never came, no bracing for the next slight or the next blow. Instead, I have settled into the rhythms of a life designed for myself by myself. The city still pulses outside, but I now live above it in a space filled with books, soft music, and the laughter of people who have chosen to be in my life not out of duty, but out of love. I have painted the walls in colors my mother never would have approved, filled the house with rescued plants and vintage furniture, and opened the doors to friends and neighbors who come not for status but for the warmth of good company and conversation. Each morning I savor a quiet cup of coffee by the window, watching the world wake up, grateful for the gift of a second chance. There is a saying I once heard: family is who stands with you when the world closes its doors. In the absence of the people who raised me, I discovered a different kind of family, the one you build brick by brick, moment by moment. I grew close to May, an elderly neighbor who had quietly watched over me during the hardest months. She invites me for Sunday dinners, teaching me the recipes her own family left behind when they moved across the country. I am Auntie Isabella to her grandchildren, who have adopted me into their noisy, joyful fold. Among my colleagues, I found real loyalty. There is Anna, who encouraged me to join a women's professional group, and James, whose kindness over years of quiet support became the foundation of true friendship. Our small circle celebrates holidays and life's milestones together, no longer performing for anyone's approval but our own. Sometimes I am invited to speak at alumni events, not as Madeline's shadow but as myself. I have mentored younger women who remind me of the person I once was: quiet, eager, waiting for permission to shine. I tell them, the world is full of people who will try to measure your worth with their eyes. Let them look. Only you get to decide the answer. With the legal matters behind me and my family's presence little more than a rumor in my new life, I turned my attention to work that matters. I started a modest scholarship fund in my grandmother's name, dedicated to students who, like me, have spent too long in the shadows. The first recipient was a young woman from Queens, balancing 3 jobs to support her siblings while studying law at night. Watching her blossom, knowing I could be a part of her story, has given me a joy that all the money in the world could never buy. At work, I took on greater responsibilities. I became a partner at the firm, leading cases that championed the underdog, especially those navigating complicated family disputes. My own story, once a source of embarrassment, became my greatest strength. I could sit across from a client, meet their eyes, and say I know how hard it is to stand up for yourself when nobody else will. There were lonely days to be sure. Not every wound heals cleanly, and not every night passes without old memories tugging at the edges of my mind. But as time marched forward, I learned the truth of something my grandmother once told me. You cannot choose where you begin, but you always get to choose how the story ends. News from my old family trickles in from time to time. My parents' business never quite recovered from the public scandal. Old friends moved on, new partners never stayed long. They sent birthday cards and holiday emails, polite, distant, full of nostalgia for a closeness that never truly existed. Madeline moved to California, or so I hear, reinventing herself as a consultant in a city that does not know her story. She sent one letter, a page of regret, mixed with rationalization, asking for forgiveness, but never quite naming what needed to be forgiven. I wrote back a single line: I hope you find the peace you always chased and the kindness you rarely showed. We have not spoken since. If you are still listening, perhaps you have a story like mine, a tale of being the quiet one, the overlooked one, the last to be chosen. Perhaps you are still waiting for the apology that will never come, or still hoping that the people who hurt you will one day understand the cost. Here is what I have learned. Forgiveness is not a gift you give to others. It is the freedom you give yourself. Letting go is not always about reconciliation. Sometimes it is about making space for joy, for dignity, and for the family you choose rather than the one you inherited. Would you have walked away if you were me? Would you have fought for justice or for peace? I would love to hear your thoughts, your own stories, your own quiet victories. The world is full of people who need to know they are not alone. As for me, I am finally living, not waiting. I have forgiven those I can release, those I cannot, and built a life that is both quieter and more radiant than anything I ever dared dream. Remember, you do not need to wait for someone else to call you family. You are enough just as you are. Thank you for listening. And if you have ever had to redefine the meaning of home or family, know that you have my respect, my understanding, and my hope for your own new beginning.